Welcome to the Center Mid Philosopher. This episode is brought to you by Augustus Royale Fashion. Life's not black and white, it's gray, and gray is beautiful. Check out the brand below in the link. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm Matt Healy, and I'm the Center Mid Philosopher. The title of this episode is called What's in a Number? It's a take on Shakespeare's What's in a Name from Romeo and Juliet, and similar into that, What's in a Name? Well, actually quite a lot. So what's in a number? A lot. You hear announcers and pundits all the time now say, oh, he's a typical 6, he's an 8, he's a 10. He's a 4, he's a 9. You hear that one quite a bit. He's a 9. They're looking for a new number 9. How did we get here? What do these numbers mean? How did these numbers become so mythological and take on an aura and symbolism and responsibility, frankly, and can oftentimes be a burden? And how did we get here? So this is going to be a brief history into jersey numbers in the game of soccer, and how did we get here, and how did they become so symbolic with certain positions, certain styles of play, certain cultures, certain teams, deify certain numbers for different reasons, and some are cursed within certain teams. And I think the biggest thing is the takeaway here is that the power of a number is almost bigger than any one player. It can catapult a career and it can tank a career.
Really excited for this one. When we were planning it together, I was just like, man, just thinking like all the extra pressure when, a young player gets assigned 10 or 9. So, yeah, man, I'm really excited to dive in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Even to, a nonchalant American fan typically knows, even watching their kid's soccer game, who's typically the best player on the team? Well, find number 10. Everyone kind of knows that. Well, how did we get here? How did 10 become that? We'll look at each number and the symbolism behind each one, famous players that wore each one, and the history of numbers in general. And then maybe the future, where are numbers going? What does the future look like for that? So going way, way, way back, prior to 1928, they didn't even wear numbers. It was just 11 guys running around out there on the field. And a guy named Herbert Chapman was a legendary Arsenal manager, pioneered the idea of wearing number strips on the back of the jersey, very first match against Sheffield Wednesday. And it was originally it was a bit of an outcast. It was like, why are you doing this? This is weird, it's complicated. But then over the next decade or so, it actually became useful. So why was it useful? Why did they start doing it? So it kind of actually started to influence formations. So there weren't probably as much of cohesive formations as there are now. You constantly hear different players, different teams where, 3-5-2, 4-4-2, 4-4-3, 4-3-3, 4-1-4-1, there's all sorts of formations. So this was kind of the beginning of that. It was a way for players to kind of know where they should be on the pitch in relation to their teammates. And so as such, it started with just 1 through 11. And 1 was the goalkeeper. And so very interestingly, the very first formation was, we typically think of it as a 3-5-2, but it was actually a 2-3-5. So the reason number 2 and 3 are the right and left back is because it went 1 and then 2 and 3 were the first 2 defenders. So they would only have 2 in the back. And then 3 in the midfield, which was 4, 5, 6. And then 7 through 11 were the top 5. So that's where it all started. And a lot of the players now still adhere to those numbers. Then years later, a lot of formations shifted to the typical MW or 4-4-2. So different numbers shifted forwards, and some went wide and some went forward. But interestingly, 2 and 3. So number 2, we'll talk about 2 a little bit more in depth here. Number 2 is typically that of a right back. Number 3 is typically that of a left back. My man Paolo Maldini, probably one of my all-time favorites. And 4, we'll go into much more depth on this, is that was originally kind of in the midfield in the 4-5-6, but over time when they realized having 2 in the back is nowhere near enough, the 4 kind of went back, and it kind of became more of a center back.
You know what my first thought was when we were chatting about this is I'm sure the refs appreciated the numbers coming into play, like having to keep up with cards and all that stuff. I'm sure that maybe it wasn't the original play, but definitely helps them.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, like having numbers at all has had a massive influence on the game because it kind of introduced different formations and, then kind of like, okay, different responsibilities for different positions and different, because I mean, a right and a left back is very different. So the 2 and 3 is extremely different than the 4. And we'll talk about the evolution of the 2s and the 3s and the 4s in a little bit more depth. But a little bit more of a history, the 7 and 11 was kind of moved wide, which is still adopted today. 11 is kind of a little bit more of a left mid. 7's typically a little bit more of a right mid. I mean, not always, but you see a lot of wingers that are 7 and 11. And so 4, 6, 8 are kind of in the middle. 4 being the furthest back, 6 being the defensive center mid, 8 being attacking center mid, and then 10 being a forward. So 9 and 10 were kind of the forwards. And interestingly, 9 has really grown to become that of the lone wolf striker, and 10 is actually, I would actually argue that Lionel Messi has kind of had a massive influence on the number 10 and being that more of an attacking center mid, which I know he still kind of plays forward now, but in his peak years at Barcelona, the 10 was actually more of a sitting right behind the 2 forwards. Maradona kind of did that as well. That's a little bit of a history. So, and then when substitutes were eventually introduced in 1965, interestingly, substitutes weren't even allowed before 1965. They were allocated ascending numbers from 12 up. Interestingly enough, too, a lot of teams skipped 13 for it being unlucky, and now a lot of teams actually skip 12 because 12 has become the honorary number to the fans. And so 12 in a lot of different teams is sort of a retired number because you hear the 12th man is the ultras, the fans.
I wonder, I'm just spitballing here, like the 9 and the 10, if you had to kind of chop up like the most recognizable, assigned to positions, it's probably the 9 and the 10. And then I would say probably next is the 7, probably. Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking to myself, it's the 3 most of the time, like prolific players on the pitch.
Yep.
And I wonder if that is why that has been ingrained into us a little more than say the 2, the 4.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, so that we've kind of gotten to why are 9s and 10s become like, why are they the goal scorers? Well, they just literally happen to be at the top. I mean, if you'd reverse the order of the numbers, where you started at 11, the goalie was 11, and you went down, well, then you'd be sitting here talking about how the 2s and 3s were the biggest goal scorers. So there's your history on how we got there. Interestingly, we've really anthropomorphized these numbers, and they have all taken on a whole new identity into themselves and are evolving all the time as we speak. And so, interestingly enough, too, so England, they were really the beginning of this, and they, interestingly enough, they still adhere to the 1 through 11, and it's like a nod to their nostalgia and the history of the game. So they still do 1 through 11 on their starting 11, and even back then, great players weren't necessarily wholly synonymous with certain players. And George Best, for example, a player typically associated with the number 7, he kind of launched number 7 globally, and certainly at Manchester United. He would don a myriad of numbers depending on where he'd start in the pitch. So it was actually like wherever you were, that's the number you played. So wherever George Best was needed, I mean, I've seen him with a 11. I've seen him with, so yeah, sometimes they say, hey, man, we need you on the left. So he would be 11. And then if he was on the right, he'd be a 7. I think I've seen him wear an 8 occasionally. We're a little bit more of an attacking center mid. But then when the inception of the Premier League is what really started to attach players to numbers. And another thing was this is interesting. So literally every country national team adhered to the 1 through 11, starting with the goalkeeper in the back all the way to the top, except for Argentina is kind of what broke the mold. In the 1974 and 1978 World Cups, they actually did it alphabetically. So Ossie Ardias was an intricate technical midfielder who would have been typically seen as the number 10, frankly, jersey. His last name was Ardias, so he was number 1. Point here is they were the ones that bucked the trend and started to introduce, you don't just have to do it by position going in the back. You can think a little bit more creatively, and then that launched where we are, the next 3 or 4 decades of very creative numbers. And then, of course, the number 10, again, it just so happened to be that was where Pele played in position. He was kind of the center forward, attacking center mid, if you will, even though he was really more of a forward, traditional 10, back in the old school 10. Back then, that would have been more of a 4-3-3, and he would have just been the center attacker. So that's kind of where the 10, but the 10's kind of been moved back in subsequent years. But Pele really launched it, and then Maradona took the number 10 and catapulted it to a whole other level. He also kind of catapulted people being attached to a certain number. So that's when it kind of started to become associated with people's brand. And, they called him El Diaz in Argentina. And back in 2002, interestingly enough, the FIFA actually said, no, everyone's got to go back to the 1 through 11 number. So Argentina acquiesced, but they tried to retire number 10 for many, many years because of Maradona, saying no one would be worthy of doing that. And they said, no, you have to have someone wear it. And so this is where it goes to, can become a bit of a burden. Ariel Ortega was given the responsibility of wearing number 10 in the 2002 World Cup. Personal favorite player of mine, however, simply having the responsibility of wearing that number kind of, I wouldn't say tanked his career, but it became, is he as good as Maradona? He's as good as Maradona? Well, no, he isn't. But he never could quite live up to that, and I think he turned to the bottle, and it kind of ruined his career.
Was Crespo on that team? Hernan Crespo was
yes,
20, and I assume he wore the 9.
Crespo was 9.
Well, I'm not looking at it or everything.
Yep,
but,
he's a 9.
Yeah, I surely wouldn't want to wear number 10 after Maradona. I'll tell you.
Yeah, and we'll actually have a whole segment on that here in a minute. But so it was really the Premier League back in the early 90s that started to buck the trend of the 1 through 11. Players started getting a little bit more creative with their number choices. But still, again, today, to this very day, right and left back, number 2, number 3. And almost 9 out of 10 center backs are number 4. So we talked about number 10 in Argentina and certainly Brazil. And number 10 is really, the player in pretty much any team, any nationality to this day. But then different clubs have really put a massive amount of symbolism, importance, heroism attached to certain numbers. AC Milan, you got Paolo Maldini and at number 3, and you got Franco Baresi at number 6. And again, that's sort of an old school number 6. The number 6 now is a little bit more of a defensive center mid. Baresi was a little bit more of a center back. But interestingly enough, those jerseys are retired now for AC Milan. The only person that can wear number 3 are Daniel or Christian Maldini, his sons, but only if they make the first team. So he put out that caveat, like they're not allowed to wear it on the junior team. So even Paolo Maldini's saying, hey, I know you're my son, but you're not worthy of that number until you play for the senior team. So no pressure there. It's just an example of how the number is even bigger than, you know what I mean? Like it's become, it's an honorary thing. And talk about pressure for your 2 sons. Like, hey, you can wear it, but only till you're good enough to start for the first team.
Yeah, that AC Milan history. We've done that on a previous episode, and all that it's like intricated and weaved in. Man, I as a soccer fan, you watch, you get to know the games, but then you kind of take a peek back in history. It's so amazing just how it's evolved and all the little intricate pieces that make up the sport that we love.
Yeah, and we talked about the number 12 being retired. So Bayern Munich and Portsmouth have retired number 12, and they call their supporters the 12th man. But now we start getting into a little bit more creative choices and people being really dogmatic about their own numbers. So one of my favorites is the number 9 shirt at Inter Milan was, El Fenomeno, Ronaldo wore that number, but someone else was wearing that number when he got there, Ivan Zamorano. And they said, sorry, bud, you got to give up number 9. And in a bit of a sarcastic protest, he wore the famous 1 + 8. So 18, but he put the plus sign in between. So he was sort of saying, I'm still number 9. So this is where numbers start getting a little bit more creative. Then again, you've had people that protest when certain people wear certain numbers, like Juventus, Carlos Tevez, was given number 10, and Del Piero wore that number for 2 decades and was such a worshipped player there that they protested him wearing it. Carlos Tevez goes on to crush it, so they kind of forgave him. But he was one that rose to the challenge. Again, nothing to the extent of Del Piero, but he did well with it. And then another example of where people start to really get weird and misinterpret numbers is Gigi Buffon, when he played at Parma, wanted to wear the number 88, and it was protested vehemently particularly with the Jewish community, because the 8th letter in the alphabet is H. So some people thought that he was saying Hail Hitler for 2 H's, and that was where you're like, oh, come on, this is getting ridiculous.
Bit of a reach, probably.
Bit of a reach,
I would say.
It's just an example of how people really place. I mean, again, going back to the Arsenal manager in 1928, just kind of arbitrarily giving numbers. Fast forward to people having massive interpretations on certain numbers. Then you started seeing players like Balotelli and Markovic at Liverpool wear number 45 and 50, despite the traditional number 7 and 11 being available. So now you're starting to see some really creative ones. Really wild, as in today. So I don't know if you've watched the Serie A lately, but there are people, Kvicha wears 77. You see 81, 92. You see all kinds of crazy numbers out there. Ronaldinho wore number 80 at AC Milan. El Shaarawy wore 92. And even more bonkers, I don't know if anybody watched the Leagues Cup, but you may have noticed at Atlas FC, number 209, 3-digit numbers.
What team was that?
Atlas FC, when they were in the Leagues Cup, Liga MX. So I was just dying to know. I was like, am I seeing that right? There's a player that is wearing number 209, and then for Pumas, so his name is Jose Guzman for Atlas, wears number 209, and Montejano for Pumas wears number 210. So I figured out why they do that is because they're youth academy players. And so youth academy players are given 3-digit numbers from 100 up, and they're not allowed to shed the 3-digit number until they're pulled into the full senior team fully. But it begs the question, will those guys keep 209 and 210 because it's such a unique brand? Now we've really opened things up to weirdness.
I don't know why, but it almost surprises me that I guess it's FIFA would allow a 3-digit number. I guess there's no I guess there's no reason. But it just seems odd, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's an example of like the World Cup. They probably won't allow that, but maybe in Liga MX it's allowed. So people are wearing 3-digit numbers now.
That's a no rules league.
Yeah.
Anyway, in my head, like for like recent number associated, I guess current events, I go back to Jude Bellingham at I think it was Bristol, right? I think it's Bristol City. He got his number retired, and he was only there, a handful of years. Obviously got his move to Dortmund and the Real Madrid, but that's one that came to mind that's like a little more recent, that number specific.
Yeah, and now that social media and everyone has a brand has really crept into everything in the last 10 or 15 years, numbers are even more important. I mean, we all know CR7. I mean, those 3 digits are letters and numbers are worth $1 billion right there. My son's AAU team's playing CP3 tomorrow. I'm just saying these numbers are really part of people's brand. So we've really gone a long way with it. There's a couple other examples of where certain numbers were available, but coaches felt there was no one worthy of wearing it, or different reasons why they won't. Like, Eto'o shunned, he's a typical number 9, of course, but he wore number 5 at Everton because that was his youth number at Cameroon, so he had a personal affinity for that number. And then Gallas at Arsenal wore number 10 because after Bergkamp retired, Arsene Wenger thought no one was worthy of wearing number 10 again. So, that's kind of an example of where random people were wearing atypical numbers. So a little bit more of a history, going back a little bit more, and let's look at each number individually. So again, goalies, you often don't even see them wearing numbers anymore, but that's the traditional, they're the number 1. Number 2 is typically that of a right back. And, not the most glamorous position, but, I think one of the things I would note right now is that you're seeing a lot more adventurous, speed, skillful number 2s out there. That you look at Tim Weah, he's sort of playing the number 2 position, or he actually has been not playing a whole lot at Juventus, but he was number 9 that's been asked to play number 2. So may I suggest that the number 2 is becoming that of some moonlighting number 9s, maybe, but some historic number 2s are Gary Neville, Manchester United, in England, Christian Panucci of many Italian teams and a personal favorite of mine, Cafu for AC Milan in Brazil, Dani Alves for Barcelona, PSG, Brazil, Lilian Thuram for Juventus in France, Diego Godin for Atletico Madrid in Uruguay, Kyle Walker for Man City in England. So again, when you start listing out some of these players, you're like, oh yeah, number 2. That is a very concrete identity, and those are some phenomenal players, some of the best defenders that have ever played the game. Legendary number 3, again, pioneered by my man Paolo Maldini here, is that of a left back. And similarly to the number 2. I might even argue that the number 3s almost have even more attack capabilities in them. Speed, strength, Paolo Maldini, AC Milan, Italy, Thiago Silva for AC Milan, PSG, Brazil, Ashley Cole for Arsenal in England, Gerard Piqué for Barcelona in Spain, Pepe for Real Madrid, Portugal, Roberto Carlos for Real Madrid in Brazil, Giorgio Chiellini for Juventus, Italy. This is another interesting one. So Gareth Bale, if many remember, really came on the scene at Tottenham as a left back. I mean, that's oftentimes where a lot of young players get their first shot, is at the number 2 and 3 position. And so he wore number 3. Sure enough, most of us think of him now as the number 11 for Real Madrid in particular. And it's just interesting, like, he didn't keep number 3. They moved him up top, and it would almost have been a faux pas to have kept number 3. Why? who cares really? But that's the symbolism of these numbers. It would have been like, oh, I would never dare wear number 3 up top. That's just a no-no.
That's a player. I'm veering off a little bit, but that's a player that a fan base turned on him, and I have no idea why.
Oh, he never.
I'm it's neither here nor there, but he gets so much shtick for golf and laziness, and all I can think of is his bike in the Champions League final. I mean, that's worth some love, I think.
I would say 10 of the top 10 Real Madrid goals of all time. He's probably got 3 of them. That bike that dribbled through the entire team at Barcelona to win the Copa del Rey. I mean, so moving on to number 4s. The legendary number 4 has grown to that of the almighty central defender, Ray Salvador. If you're listening, shout out to you. I don't know if you were number 4, but I remember you saying you were center back. So this number 4 is that of kind of strength, leadership, wisdom, made famous by Der Kaiser, Franz Beckenbauer, Bayern Munich, Cosmos, Germany, Sergio Ramos, Real Madrid, Spain, now Sevilla, of course, Ronald Koeman at Ajax, PSV, Barcelona, and of course Holland, Virgil van Dijk of Liverpool, Claude Makélélé, even though Claude Makélélé I would say is a little bit of a 6 in spirit, but still similar thing. Patrick Vieira, again, a little bit more of a 6 type player with the Invincibles era, Arsenal, and of course France. Steve Bruce for Man U in England, Fernando Hierro at Real Madrid in Spain, Pep Guardiola for Barcelona in Spain. So I think it's also worth noting, if you were to listen to that names, anyone would probably be able to say, what's the common thread amongst that group? That's a lot of coaches. And not only coaches, really good coaches and visionary coaches of today. So it would seem the number 4, you may have a future as a coach, interestingly. And, there's sort of the yin to the yang of that of the center mid philosopher. They're sort of the center back stoics, if you will. Also, if you want to get really weird with it, a lot of German, Dutch, French, and Spanish, 1 British. Might also call the number 4 position that of imperialism and colonialism. A lot of foreign rule there. A lot of generals in that. A lot of conquistadors, if you will. And so this is where it gets really interesting. So going up the middle here, when 6 was 4 and when 4 was 6. So some 4s went forward and some 6 went back. Recently, number 4 is commonly known more of as a center back, and number 6 is more of a defensive center mid. Interestingly, number 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, all up the middle, and advancing in goal scoring prowess as you advance. And I mean, again, that's a given. But when you know the history, you're like, oh, that makes complete sense. And all 4 of those numbers have a massive amount of symbolism in their own and have become very idiosyncratic and individualistic in their own right. This is a really interesting one. So let's go to number 6. Number 6 right now has never been hotter. There's been many articles being written about how clubs are paying astronomical sums for number 6s that a decade ago were, I don't want to say an afterthought, but no one thought much of number 6s as being, but data analytics and the new age and has uncovered their value and has shown that they get more passes into the final third, they win more tackles, they have more touches. Chelsea alone has bought 97 number 6s, evidently. They have literally 15 defensive center mids and have, of their $1 billion in transfer fees, almost 30% of it are for number 6s. Caicedo is a tenth of it himself. So are Romeo Lavia, numerous others. I'm going to digress here a little bit and just say I actually think the number 6 position is overvalued right now. I'm a number 8, number 5, 8, occasionally 10 type of a player. if you want to get really interesting, if you were to compare number 6 to a stock, they're kind of the Walt Disneys, the Amazons right now. Maybe a little overpriced. Like, I get the value, but I'm just saying that more touches, tackles I get, more touches and more passes in the final third. That doesn't mean it leads to a goal. I mean, I think right now, like 9 out of 10 clubs in the world would pay twice as much for a Rodri than they would for a Kevin De Bruyne. I'd buy Kevin De Bruyne 10 times, 6 days and 7 times on Sundays.
It's almost like you could, if I could have a really good number 10 and a, better than average 6, you think I could do a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, I have down here, Declan Rice got a huge move this summer. Caicedo, you already talked about. I guess Enzo's a little bit more of an 8, a little bit more playmaking.
But I would definitely put him in the 6 category too, for sure. And I'd say now's a great time to go buy yourself a shiny number 8 or number 10.
Yeah, that's a hot real estate right now.
Yeah, I mean, because the number 6 in my opinion, are overvalued. That being said, though, I'm not giving them their fair due. They're incredible players. So let's talk about some of the greatest number 6s of all time. Xavi. There is no Iniesta without Xavi. Interestingly enough, 6 and 8. They were true to form there. Ronald de Boer from Ajax, AC Milan, Barcelona, Holland. Matthias Sammer from Borussia Dortmund, Germany. Bobby Moore is a historic one for Man U in England. Pogba, please come back wherever you are. I know you're hurt and all kinds of trouble, but Juventus, Man U, France. Camavinga, Real Madrid in France. Thiago Silva, Chelsea, Brazil. Marco Verratti, PSG, Italy, now Saudi League. So that's the number 6. Again, that's your linchpin, your rock in the back of the midfield.
I think, like Maradona made 10. Not it was established before, but he like really kind of set it off. I want to say to the average to semi above average soccer fan, I feel like that Xavi and Iniesta, I feel like they kind of made the 6 and the 8 a little bit more recognizable. I think maybe that's just me and my generation or whatever. But to me, the first number 6 and the first number 8 that I think about would probably be that duo.
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, interesting enough, you go back in time here. I mean, yeah, they're about as typical 6 and 8 as you're going to get. But when you really start recognizing the theme, there's a lot of them here, and there's a lot more. We'll talk about 8 more in a minute, but Steven Gerrard, he's like he's the first one I think of when I think of a number 8. That really attacking center mid. We skipped over number 5, and number 5 is near and dear to my heart because that's what I wore. And I would like to say, of all the numbers 1 through 11, I feel like the number 5 has been kind of left in the dust here a little bit. You don't hear anyone say, "Oh, they're a true number 5," and I would like to change that right here, right now. So go and use that from this point forward. They're number 5. All right, what's a number 5? Well, I'm going to tell you what a number 5 is. To me, when I was coming along in the early 90s, the number 5 had strong symbolism and an honor to me because number 5 to me was that of the can do it all center mid, can just absolutely get stuck in and just eviscerate someone, but also had all the talent in the world to be the best player on the field in any given time and put it in the back of the net. And the two that I think of the first are Zidane. And then number 2 behind him is Fernando Rodon. I think probably one of the best do-it-all center mids of Real Madrid or Argentina's all time.
And I think too, so like the 5 would be the player that he could play the 6, he could play the 8.
Yeah.
He could play the 10.
It's kind of a combo, 6-8.
It's kind of just like where you need him to fit in the particular buildup of the team. That's when the number 5 would go assume one of those 3
Yeah, number 5 can mark the other team's best player, but he could also take 3 people on and rip it upper 90 from outside the 18. And to me, that's Zidane. To me, he could do anything. And I think they're rock stars, tough, brilliant, romantic, stylish, enigmatic, mercurial, tough. Some other interesting fives. They're kind of all over the map, and they slant a little bit more defensively. Cannavaro, Carlos Puyol, Rio Ferdinand, Sergio Busquets.
I think of Gundogan as a city guy and he's one where depending on the lineup, he's
a great one.
Defensive 6, 8. I've seen him more advanced. So that's the one that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I mean it's but to me, I don't know, the number 5 position has tremendous symbolism to me. So go start saying, so this is what I would say about a number 5 is like your number 6 might be a little bit more your steady Eddie. Your number 5 might be a little bit more out there. He's a little bit more likely to backpack through Europe, reading Nietzsche, listening to Grateful Dead dick pics, maybe crying outside his girlfriend's apartment in the rain. The personality pendulum swings a little further. And I might be putting a little bit too much on Zidane here. Zidane has this mythical status in that, when he retired from France and he came back, he said that he was visited in a dream by a figure that told him he needed to come back. I mean, to me, that's the number 5. It's just maybe a little out there, maybe a dash of crazy, but you want him in the foxhole with you, that's for sure. And then, okay, all right, couldn't be hotter. Who's the best player wearing number 5? Bellingham. He's been bestowed the honor of wearing number 5, and maybe he's the new, and I couldn't think of a better one to be like, all right, that's a number 5, and he could be a Ballon d'Or contestant this year.
Can't stop scoring.
No,
I mean some of those are just right place, right time, but someone's got to be there.
Yeah. All right, let's go. Let's keep moving on. Number 8, another great one. Another position with a big personality. So the number 8 is the yang to the number 6 yin, the attacking center mid. And again, I already said this, but the very first number 8 I think of is Steven Gerrard. That guy's highlight reel can rival anyone's. Ronaldo, Messi, Maradona, Thierry Henry. You often hear the phrase box-to-box midfielder. That can kind of be applied to a 6 or an 8. But they're kind of the one that operates in the middle, connecting defense and attack. The maven, if you will, the highly mobile, all over the pitch, the Swiss Army knife of the bunch. Some other number 8 legends are, of course, Iniesta, Toni Kroos, Frank Lampard were an 8 but I think more of, for England, I think more of Gerrard for number 8. But Lampard's a good number 8 as well, of course. Hristo Stoichkov, Socrates, Gennaro Gattuso, interestingly, wore number 8, who I really think is more of a 6 in spirit. But he's Juninho, the famous Brazilian free kick taker. Kaká wore number 8. Frankie Ljungberg. Paul Scholes would have been a good 8, but he wore 18, interestingly. So that's the 8. We skipped over another number 7. It's a big one. This is in one where certain clubs have a lot of symbolism on the number. Manchester United, obviously, is the biggest one. George Best really was the creator of that number 7. We talked about he wore other numbers, but he became synonymous with that number 7. And, some of the best players of all time for Man U were number 7. Brian Robson, Eric Cantona, David Beckham, and then, of course, Cristiano Ronaldo. So I would argue that the number 7 catapulted Cristiano Ronaldo's career. Just that. If he had been set, you're number 15, I'm not sure he would have been Cristiano Ronaldo that he is today. He was given the responsibility and he was deemed worthy of wearing number 7, and I would even argue that the spirits of Beckham, Cantona, Best, Robson lifted him up and catapulted to where he is. Like he rose to that. He relished that. He used that, and it gave him more confidence wearing the number 7. Now, many since, and frankly, no one since has been worthy of wearing the crown of number 7. Those that have tried, and again, great players. I'm not saying, but just it's been a bit of a revolving door of number 7 since. Memphis Depay, Alexis Sanchez, Angel Di Maria, Michael Owen, Cavani, Valencia, and now Mason Mount. I wonder how Mason Mount's going to do with it. I would argue it's frankly cursed him. But, I mean, he's doing fine. But, I mean, we'll see. And so it's interesting. There's an example of a number, seemingly innocuous number, meaningless. Angel Di Maria couldn't get out of there fast enough. I mean, I'm just saying, the responsibility of being that great. If he had been given his number 11, maybe he'd still be there. I mean, I don't know. I doubt it, but maybe. Other famous sevens, Raul, Ribéry, Kevin Keegan, Luis Figo, Schweinsteiger, Garrincha, and Mbappe wears number 7 too. A real Man U, Real Madrid flavor with a dash of Bayern Munich and old school Liverpool in there. All right, let's keep going. We're trucking now. Let's get to one of the big ones, number 9, the striker, the lone wolf, Delta Force. Parachute him in there. They're there to do one thing and one thing only: put it in the back of the net. Your hot shots, your Mavericks, in the words of Tupac, all eyes on me, and that kind of goes back to the old school from 1 to 11. Number 9 kind of, we're going to get to 10. We're saving the best for last. Number 9, it's odd. One would think that number 10 would be, or one would think number 11 would be the striker, frankly, but 7 and 11 stayed out this way. All the even numbers kind of went up through the middle. Number 10, I would argue, is players like Maradona and Messi and many others were kind of asked to pull back. They were frankly too good. They're like, we need you helping out in the midfield and getting playing, serving the ball up to others as well. But the number 9 has become synonymous with the lone attacker. And interestingly enough, too, back when I was coming up, the 9 and 10 in the 4-4-2 days, you'd have 2 up top. But now a lot of teams have left that number 9. I would say the likes of Ronaldo, Il Fenomeno, and the likes of Erling Haaland and Benzema, Harry Kane, Batistuta, Alan Shearer, Luis Suarez, Zlatan used to wear Fernando Torres, Van Basten, Higuain, George Weah. Those guys were all capable of kind of operating up top. They're just blistering pace. It was just a counteract. I mean, you could get them in there by themselves, and they could either hold it, ditch it back off to a number 10 or 8 or 7, 11 for a goal, or go it themselves. But talk about the evolution of number 9 a little bit too. It's advancing even to this very day. Jurgen Klopp actually calls the number 9 the first line of defense. So you could say the best defense is an offense. Well, to Klopp, the best offense is a defense, evidently.
Heavy metal football, baby.
That's right. Absolutely. Heavy metal football. Number 9, first line of defense. Does Nunes wear number 9?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I don't want to make that call.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, anyway, he's balling here lately. So yeah, number 9, that's your striker. That you now know why number 9 is what it is. And so when you hear that they're a true number 9, that's what they are. They're the true striker. Well, in U.S. soccer, we're constantly asking, who's our true number 9? Is it Pepe? Is it Balogun? Is it Sargent? Again, this is one of those where I feel like we've almost overdone that, where like the 9 has to be up top by themselves. And I'm like, put Pepe and Balogun up there together. You know what I mean? I mean, frankly, sit Weah and have 2 up top, in my opinion. I don't know. That's one where like the numbers have almost been, the tail has wagged the dog on that one a little bit. And it's like, who says you can't have 2 strikers? I mean, that's when I was coming along, it was 4-4-2, and you have 9 and 10 or 9 and 11, whatever it is up top.
I was calling for Weah to play up top. Last World Cup, I would have loved to see him at the 9, and then have your kind of more dynamic players out. Actually, Caleb, who'll be on a future episode, we had that conversation all the time. Truthfully.
Yeah. All right, so getting here to the end, the mother of them all, the king of the castle, the master of their domain, the Messiah, the one touched by God, Italian, Argentinian, Brazilian cultures have deified this number 10. All started with Pele, as we talked. God rest his soul, the original number 10. I mean, that's where it all started. And then Maradona really took it to a whole other level. And then, other greats, Platini, Ronaldinho, Totti, Baggio, Bergkamp, have all worn it. Number 10 in Argentina, we talked about a little bit more earlier, is, just a cult-like status. I mean, who's going to wear the number 10? And it literally, I don't want to say tanked, but Ariel Ortega, I mean, again, great player, but he just wasn't worthy of it. He couldn't handle the pressure. He didn't want the pressure, frankly. Argentina didn't want him to have it, but FIFA demanded that someone wear it, and he kind of flamed out a little earlier than he should, El Burro. Riquelme wore it for a while. He did it proud-ish. People love Riquelme. I think he was, frankly, a little bit overrated, but a good player, and he did okay. But Paulo Barrientos, Marcelo Espina, Angel Correa, Nacho Gonzalez, Javier Pastore, Ever Banega. Love Ever Banega. He's more of a 6 or 5, frankly, in my opinion. He's a 5. But he was given that. Andres D'Alessandro, I love that player from River. Angel Di Maria, Sergio Aguero, son-in-law to Maradona, and best friend of Leo Messi. Pablo Aimar. Just named a handful of some of my all-time favorite players, but none of those guys were the number 10. And it was too much for a lot of those guys to wear. I mean, phenomenal careers a lot of those guys had. And no one really was able to kind of carry the throne until Messi. But it's worth mentioning, he had about a 20-year period there where it was kind of a love-hate relationship with him back at home in Argentina. A lot of people were like, he's more Spanish than he is Argentinian. He finally got it done. We just got it in Qatar, winning the World Cup.
I think it's funny, before the World Cup, the argument, whether it's fair or not, Messi and Ronaldo, right, always get compared to each other, who's better. And people would bring up the international success relative that Ronaldo had over Messi, and that was kind of like a chip that they used. Mm-hmm. And then he won the World Cup, and then history wrote itself. But yeah,
I mean, again, like Messi is synonymous with number 10-ish though, because his early days at Barcelona, he was number 30, and then I think he rocked number 19 for a while, which I loved, and then. You kind of had to wear number 10. I mean, it was like you don't have a choice. Someone's got to wear number 10. It's got to be you. And so he had to do it for Argentina. But frankly, I think one of the things with Messi is he's like, don't make me be Maradona. I think he would have continued to rock number 19 if they had let him, and maybe all that pressure wouldn't have been there. But anyway, he overcame it, and thank goodness he did. Bayern Munich, Thomas Mueller's worn it. He calls it the Ramateur, which is space investigator is what they call that. It's the magician. It's the one that creates something out of nothing. He turns the tides. He walks on water, and is literally worshipped in a religious-like status in a lot of different countries.
I saw Line Breaker was one too. Kind of, he's the decisive pass. He's the one that creates the opportunity before the opportunity, or whatever. Line breakers, another one I saw in there.
That's a good one. And Lothar Matthäus, Luka Modric are some great number 10s. I mean, they're number 10s. Again, I would just say about number 10, it's bigger than any one of them, because it's not Messi, Maradona. It's Messi, Maradona, Pele, Lothar Matthäus, Modric. I mean, there's infinite numbers of others. And then the last out of the 11 is number 11. Is that kind of that of going in ascending order? Is that of kind of the outside winger going in? And when I think of number 11, my all-time favorite is Ryan Giggs, and that's the person that embodies the number 11 best to anyone to me. Other good ones: Gareth Bale, we talked about him. Mo Salah, Di Maria, right here. Drogba. Which, interestingly, I think of him was more of a 9, but he wore number 11. Michael Laudrup, again, I think of him more of a 5 or 8 center mid, but he wore 11. Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, Miroslav Klose, Edgar David, some really good 11s in there. I feel like the 11, this is getting weird, but it's almost like they're kind of the like has it all, but just chose to sit in the back of the class. Like they could be the student body president, but just chose to sit in the back of the class, listen to Joy Division, and get all the chicks, kind of a thing. Like Ryan Giggs, interestingly, there was a time where he was thought to rival that of David Beckham in terms of like a heartthrob, it guy of the Great Britain. And he consciously chose another route of a quieter existence, albeit still a Manchester United legend. But he didn't go marry a Spice Girl, but he could have. Let's see. So wrapping up here, just some other numbers that are worth mentioning that are outside that of the 1 through 11. Number 14 for Cruyff, Thierry Henry. Number 19, number 30 will always have a special place in my heart with, that of Messi. And then, of course, number 23, Michael Jordan. That even permeated soccer as well.
So I zoomed out a little bit, right? Sports, we love it, because most of us played it, but it's romantic, right? Like the storylines. I just thought of other numbers that kind of add to that romanticism. Michigan's number 1 wide receiver in college football usually wears number 1. I thought that was interesting. 23 and 24 for basketball, right? Kobe, LeBron, Michael Jordan. I just think sports are so intricate, and we love them so much, but that romanticism is what really drives community within that. And it's just amazing how something as simple as numbers on the back of a jersey can just add so much to all sports pretty much.
Yeah, number 12, a lot of quarterbacks wear number 12.
TB12, baby.
Yeah, that's right. So like number 23, of course, that crossed over sports and crossed continents from Michael Jordan, and then Beckham started wearing number 23 actually at Real Madrid, and Sol Campbell wore 23, Jamie Carragher, Robbie Fowler, Arshavin wore 23 at one point. Again, just kind of going back to the beginning, what was just pretty much an arbitrary way to kind of maintain or keep some order to 1 through 11 players has really grown to become this massively symbolic, mystic aura of around these numbers that literally are massive billion-dollar brands associated with them, and they're continuing to evolve in what they mean, their symbolism, their style of play. Different cultures are attached to them, and who knows what the future will hold. Maybe we'll be talking about number 209 having a brand all to itself here in the not too different future. So just hopefully you learned something, the history of why numbers are the way that they are, why certain players wear them, why certain styles are attached to them, different roles, responsibilities, how it can literally catapult a career. It can frankly tank a career. It can lead someone to alcoholism and to quit the game altogether, or it can literally catapult someone into global stardom in the case of Cristiano Ronaldo. So this has been the Center Mid Philosopher. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, if you like today's show, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts.
Follow.
Yeah, give us a follow. And, if there's something particular, a topic that you want us to discuss, leave it in the comments, and we'll craft it into the show. So appreciate everybody watching. Matt, you got anything else?
Nope. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Hope you learned something, and stay tuned for the next episode.